this presentation, you will learn about social welfare and the issues of rights, constitutional provisions for reservation. Definition of scheduled castes, SC. The President specifies the castes, races or tribes or parts of or groups within castes, races or tribes with respect to any state or union territory after consultation with the governor thereof and by public notification. These shall be deemed to be scheduled castes in relation to that state or union territory for the purposes of the Constitution. By law, Parliament may include or exclude any caste, race or tribe or part of or group within any caste, race or tribe from the list of scheduled castes specified in a notification issued under Clause 1, but a notification issued under the said clause shall not be varied by any subsequent notification. Scheduled castes means such castes, races or tribes or parts of or groups within such castes, races or tribes deemed under Article 341 to be scheduled castes for the purposes of the Indian Constitution. Definition of scheduled tribes. India's Constitution is the first document to mention scheduled tribes. According to Article 366(25) of the Constitution, scheduled tribes are those tribes or tribal communities or parts or groups within them which are deemed under Article 342 to be scheduled tribes. In regard to any state or union territory, the President may, upon consultation with the governor thereof, by public notification, specify the tribes or tribal communities or parts or groups within those tribes or tribal communities. These will be the scheduled tribes of the state or union territory. By law, the Parliament may include or exclude from the list of scheduled tribes specified in a notification issued under Clause 1 any tribe or tribal community or part of or group within any tribe or tribal community, but a notification issued under the said clause cannot be varied thereafter. The President, after consulting with the state governments concerned, specifies scheduled tribes in a notified order in relation to each state or union territory. Only Parliament can amend these orders subsequently. Despite abolishing untouchability, prejudice against SCs and STs persists in some form or the other, be it overt, covert, or subtle in expression. Atrocities against SCs and STs continue to occur frequently. More and more Dalits and Adivasis are becoming landless and are joining the ranks of agricultural laborers. Loss of land is caused by atrocities against Dalits and Adivasis. This state of landlessness makes them vulnerable and fuels and promotes further perpetration of atrocities against them. Since the 1980s, there has been a steady decline in the allocation of government funds for SC and ST development and welfare projects. Despite providing reservation quotas for jobs, the representation of SCs and STs at the higher levels of all public services remain poor. However, the policies that are present are elucidated below. For protection and development of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, the provision and safeguards for backward classes, especially SCs and STs, have been included in the Indian Constitution. The safeguards are in the field of social, economic, political, educational, cultural, and services under the state for people belonging to these communities for their development. Safeguards for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. Social safeguards. Articles 17, 23, 24 and 25 Clause 2b of the Constitution instruct the state to provide social safeguards to scheduled castes. Article 17 is in relation to the abolition of untouchability that is being practiced in society. The Parliament put into practice the Protection of Civil Rights Act 1955 and the Scheduled Castes and Scheduled Tribes Prevention of Atrocities Act 1989 to address and abolish untouchability practiced against the scheduled castes. Article 23 forbids traffic in human beings and beggar and other similar forms of forced labor and states that any contravention of this provision shall be an offensive punishable by law. Even though there are no specific mentions about the SCs in this article, the majority of the bonded labor comes from SCs. Hence, this article is important for their protection. The Parliament enacted the Bonded Labour System Abolition Act 1976 for identification, liberation and rehabilitation of bonded labourers. Article 24 instructs that any child below the age of 14 years shall not be employed to work in any factory or mine or involved in any other form of dangerous employment. In this article as well, there is no specific mention of the SCs, but a considerable portion of child labour engaged in dangerous employment belongs to SCs. Article 25 Clause 2b states that Hindu religious institutions and organizations that are public in nature shall be accessible to all classes and sections of Hindus. The term Hindu also contains persons professing Sikh, Jain and Buddhist religion. Economic safeguards. Articles 23, 24 and 46 form a portion of the economic safeguards for the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. Article 46 says that the state shall promote with significant care the educational and economic interests of the economically weaker sections of the people, especially of the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes, and shall shield them from social injustice and exploitation. Educational and cultural safeguards. Article 15, Clause 4 gives power to the state to make important provisions for the progress of any socially and educationally backward classes of citizens and for SCs. This provision has allowed the state to reserve seats for SCs in educational institutions for general and professional courses and so on. Political safeguards. Reservation of seats for SCs, STs in the local bodies of the states, union territories, legislative assemblies of the state, and in parliament are given in the Indian Constitution as follows. Article 243D Reservation of seats. Seats shall be reserved for scheduled castes, scheduled tribes in all panchayats as well as municipalities. The proportion of number of reserved seats to the total number of seats to be filled by direct election in that panchayat or municipality will be as close as possible to the proportion of the population of the scheduled castes in that panchayat area or of the scheduled tribes in that constituency to the total population of that area. These seats may be allotted by rotation to different constituencies in a panchayat or municipality. 1/3 or more of the total number of seats reserved under Clause 1 shall be reserved for women belonging to the scheduled castes or scheduled tribes. 1/3 or more, including the number of seats reserved for women belonging to scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, of the total number of seats to be filled by direct election in every panchayat shall be reserved for women, and such seats may be allocated by rotation to different constituencies in a panchayat. Reservation of seats for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes in the House of People. Seats shall be reserved in the House of People for the scheduled castes, the scheduled tribes, except the scheduled tribes in the autonomous districts of Assam, and scheduled castes in the autonomous districts of Assam. The number of seats reserved in any state or union territory for the scheduled castes or the scheduled tribes under Clause 1 shall bear the same proportion to the total number of seats allocated to that state or union territory in the House of the People as the population of the scheduled castes or tribes in the state or union territory holds to the total population of the state or union territory. Reservation of seats for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes in the legislative assemblies of the states. Seats shall be reserved for the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes, except the scheduled tribes in the autonomous districts of Assam, in the legislative assembly of every state. The number of seats reserved for the scheduled castes or the scheduled tribes in the legislative assembly of any state under Clause 1 shall bear as nearly as may be the same proportion to the total number of seats in the assembly as the population of the scheduled castes in the state or the scheduled tribes in the state or part of the state, as the case may be, in respect of which seats are so reserved bears to the total population of the state. Definition of other backward classes. Apart from the SCs and STs, there are other backward classes also recognized. Backward classes are not defined in the Indian Constitution. It is up to the center and to the state to decide which classes belong to this group. Backward classes are those that are educationally or socially disadvantaged. Under Article 340, the President may appoint a commission to examine the conditions of socially and educationally backward groups. Some provisions for other backward classes, safeguards related to education and public employment. The state makes special provisions in the Constitution for the advancement of any socially and educationally backward classes of citizens. These provisions related to their admission to educational institutions, including private educational institutions, whether aided or unaided by the state, other than the minority educational institutions. The state makes provisions for reservation of appointments or posts in favor of backward classes of citizens that are not adequately represented in the services under the state. State considers any unfulfilled vacancies of a year which are reserved for being filled up in that year in accordance with the provision for reservation as a separate class of vacancies to be filled up in succeeding year or years, and such class of vacancies are not considered together with the vacancies of the year in which they are filled up for determining the ceiling of 50% reservation on total number of vacancies of that year. Agency for monitoring provisions. According to Article 340 Clause 1 of the Constitution, on the basis of the report by an appointed commission, the President can specify references to scheduled castes as classes including other backward classes and the Anglo-Indian community. Thank you for watching the presentation.